went up to Stanley and I said, look, you know, I think I could do this part real well. How about giving me a shot at it? I'd like to audition. He says, you're just not mean enough, Lee. You're too nice.
Think you know Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket? Think again. Beyond the terrifying cadence of R. Lee Ermey's drill instructor drills and the haunting desolation of the Hue City battlegrounds lies a production marred by real-world car crashes, actual military interventions, broken ribs, and a legendary director pushed to the absolute brink of his sanity. Lock and load, because we are stripping down Kubrick's masterwork to reveal 20 jarring, bizarre, and downright chaotic facts you absolutely never saw coming. The drill sergeant who wasn't supposed to be there. The cinematic landscape was permanently altered by the terrifying rapid-fire performance of R. Lee Ermey as Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. Yet, he was never meant to utter a single line in the film. Initially, Kubrick hired Ermey strictly as a technical advisor due to his real-life background as a U.S. Marine drill instructor during the Vietnam War. The role of Hartman had already been given to another actor, Tim Colseri. However, Ermey had a fierce determination to claim the role for himself, to prove to the notoriously meticulous director that he was the only man for the job. Ermey put together a homemade audition tape that defied all conventional Hollywood standards. He gathered a group of British Royal Marines who were acting as extras, lined them up, and unleashed a non-stop 15-minute barrage of highly inventive, unscripted insults while people threw tennis balls at his head. Ermey didn't flinch, blink, or break character once during the entire onslaught. When Kubrick watched the tape, he was utterly spellbound by the sheer, terrifying authenticity radiating from the screen. He realized that no traditional actor could ever replicate that genuine military intensity, leading to the immediate and brutal replacement of Colseri. It was a legendary casting swap that gave birth to one of cinema's most iconic villains. Did you know that this sudden casting shakeup was only the beginning of the complete creative freedom that this former military man managed to wrest away from Hollywood's most notorious and controlling perfectionist? The insult Rolodex was 100% raw and uncut. Stanley Kubrick is famous for being a tyrannical perfectionist who demanded absolute adherence to his written scripts, often forcing actors to repeat a single line 100 times. Yet, R. Lee Ermey managed to accomplish the impossible. He convinced Kubrick to let him improvise his dialogue. Kubrick had estimated that roughly 50% of Ermey's dialogue in the boot camp, half of the film, was completely ad-libbed on the spot. To achieve this, Ermey wrote out roughly 150 pages of pure, unadulterated insults, military slang, and psychological jargon that he remembered from his actual tours of duty. Kubrick would sit with Ermey for hours, reviewing the colorful tirades to ensure they fit the scene's emotional trajectory. But the delivery was all Ermey. The result was an astonishingly raw display of verbal warfare. Ermey's insults were so bizarrely poetic and shocking that they genuinely caught the younger actors off guard during filming, eliciting real, unscripted reactions of fear and discomfort. This rare creative concession from Kubrick proved that even the most controlling director in cinema history knew when to step aside and let real-world lightning strike his lens, forever changing movie dialogue standards globally. Vietnam in London? Welcome to Beckton Gas Works. One of the most surreal aspects of Full Metal Jacket is that the entire movie was filmed without a single foot of film being shot in Asia. Because Kubrick suffered from a severe, lifelong phobia of flying, he refused to travel to actual tropical locations like the Philippines, where films like Platoon or Apocalypse Now were shot. Instead, he decided to bring the Vietnam War to the outskirts of London. To recreate the bombed-out urban wasteland of the 1968 Battle of Hue, Kubrick's production team located the Beckton Gas Works, a massive, abandoned industrial coal products plant scheduled for demolition in East London. The architecture of the gasworks happened to perfectly mirror the functional French colonial structural style found throughout Vietnam. Kubrick spent several weeks systematically directing a demolition crew to methodically blow up parts of the buildings, shatter windows, and smash walls with wrecking balls until the site looked indistinguishable from a war-torn province. The actors spent months breathing in toxic dust, old asbestos, and industrial pollution in the freezing British cold, creating a grim, authentically miserable environment that heavily bled into their bleak performances on screen, far removed from sunny, warm Hollywood. The 100,000-word script that changed every single day. The writing process behind this masterpiece was an exercise in absolute, unmitigated chaos. Kubrick collaborated with original The Short-Timers novelist Gustav Hasford and veteran war correspondent Michael Herr to construct the screenplay. However, because Kubrick's creative process was incredibly fluid, unpredictable, and entirely reactive to the performances on set, the script was never truly finished, even while cameras were actively rolling. The writers collectively generated over 100,000 words of dialogue, scenes, and alternate storylines during production, resulting in a mountain of discarded text. Actors would show up to the set at 6 in the morning, ready to shoot a scene they had meticulously rehearsed the night before, only to have a production assistant hand them entirely new pages of dialogue fresh off Kubrick's typewriter. Matthew Modine recalled that the script evolved constantly based on Kubrick's daily whims, current global news, or interesting things the director observed the actors doing when they thought nobody was watching. This perpetual state of narrative instability kept the entire cast in a state of constant anxiety and hyper-awareness, a psychological trick that Kubrick intentionally utilized to mirror the real-world uncertainty and psychological disorientation experienced by young soldiers heading into combat. It meant that no actor could ever get comfortable, forcing them to live perpetually on a razor's edge where memory failure was a constant threat, and the demanding director expected flawless adaptability at a moment's notice. Vincent D'Onofrio's record-breaking massive weight gain. To play the tragic and deeply disturbed character of Private Leonard Gomer Pyle Lawrence, a young actor named Vincent D'Onofrio underwent one of the most grueling and dangerous physical transformations in Hollywood history. At the time of his casting, D'Onofrio was a lean, physically fit, 200-pound New York actor. To fulfill Kubrick's specific visual concept of a soft, clumsy, and physically inadequate recruit who collapses under the immense pressure of basic training, D'Onofrio was ordered to gain a staggering 70 pounds. This massive weight increase shattered the previous Hollywood record held by Robert De Niro, who famously gained 60 pounds for his Oscar-winning role in Raging Bull. The rapid physical transformation took an immense toll on D'Onofrio's body. The sudden extra weight put so much pressure on his lower joints that he severely tore his surgical ligaments in his knee during the obstacle course filming sequence, requiring extensive surgery to repair. Furthermore, the weight gain completely altered how people treated him on and off the set. He noted that people stopped looking him in the eye and treated him with a bizarre mix of pity and disgust, mirroring Pyle's isolation. It took the dedicated actor nearly 9 long months of disciplined, exhausting diet and exercise to finally shed the weight after filming concluded. The real-life car crash that halted production. Just as the grueling production was gaining significant momentum, disaster struck from a completely unexpected direction outside the studio gates. Lee Ermey was involved in a near-fatal, middle-of-the-night car accident on a dark, slick British road, losing control of his vehicle and crashing down a steep embankment. The impact was devastating, breaking all the ribs on one side of his torso and causing severe internal injuries that left him completely incapacitated. For any normal Hollywood production, a catastrophe of this magnitude involving a primary antagonist would lead to immediate recasting or complete cancellation. However, Kubrick was so utterly convinced that Ermey was the irreplaceable soul of the boot camp sequence that he chose to shut down the entire multi-million-dollar movie set for over 4 exhausting months. Production ground to an absolute halt, while Ermey slowly and painfully recovered in a local hospital. When he finally returned to the set, he was still in excruciating pain and could barely draw a full breath, let alone deliver his signature high-volume, rapid-fire military tirades. Kubrick had to carefully arrange the shooting schedule and camera angles so Ermey could sit down between takes, rationing the actor's vocal energy while keeping his physical frailty completely hidden from the camera's lens. Anthony Michael Hall was supposed to be Joker. The entire dynamic of the film almost looked completely different, as the pivotal role of Private Joker was originally bought and paid for by a major 80s teen icon. Anthony Michael Hall, fresh off massive box office successes like The Breakfast Club and Weird Science, was handpicked by Kubrick to play the cynical protagonist. Hall spent nearly 8 long months preparing for the role, lifting weights and mentally adjusting to Kubrick's notoriously demanding reputation. However, when it came time to finalize the official contracts and scheduling logistics, things fell apart in a spectacular clash of Hollywood egos. The battle came down to creative control and compensation. Kubrick expected absolute, unquestioning subservience and an indefinite time commitment, while Hall's management demanded a defined shooting schedule and massive star-level pay. The negotiations grew so incredibly toxic and bitter that Hall walked away entirely, leaving Kubrick without a lead actor just weeks before the cameras were set to roll. Matthew Modine was quickly cast as his replacement, using a rogue audition tape to secure the job, while Hall missed out on a career-defining transition from lighthearted teen comedies to prestigious, high-end dramatic cinema. Arnold Schwarzenegger said no to the ultimate war movie. In another universe of casting what-ifs, the character of Animal Mother, the hyper-aggressive, heavy machine gun-wielding ultimate warrior of the squad, was written with a massive action superstar explicitly in mind. Kubrick desperately wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to fill the combat boots of the terrifyingly volatile soldier. At the time, Schwarzenegger was rapidly ascending the Hollywood ladder and looking for prestigious projects to cement his status as a serious dramatic actor. However, after reviewing the script and understanding the realities of Kubrick's notoriously unpredictable, never-ending filming style, the Austrian oak made the highly calculated decision to pass on the project. He realized that signing onto a Kubrick film meant putting his entire career on hold for up to 2 years in the cold British countryside. Instead, Schwarzenegger chose to head into the lush, warm jungles of Central America to film Predator, an action masterwork that perfectly aligned with his explosive cinematic brand. The role of Animal Mother was subsequently handed to Adam Baldwin, who delivered a brilliantly unhinged, feral performance that perfectly captured the character's terrifying, battle-hardened psyche, proving that some casting rejections work out beautifully for both projects. The literal jungle imported directly to the UK. Stanley Kubrick's legendary obsession with micromanaging every visual detail reached peak absurdity when it came to recreating the lush, tropical environment of Southeast Asia. Because he refused to travel outside of England, his production team was forced to construct a believable tropical ecosystem from scratch within the cold, damp confines of the British countryside. To pull off this geographical illusion, Kubrick orchestrated the massive importation of real, exotic flora from all over the world. The production ordered over 200 fully grown Spanish palm trees shipped directly from North Africa, along with nearly 100,000 plastic plants manufactured in Hong Kong to fill out the dense jungle undergrowth. Additionally, tons of authentic Spanish moss were flown in from the American South to drape over the structures. Keeping these tropical plants alive in the freezing, rainy British autumn became a logistical nightmare for the Greens crew, who had to use massive heaters to prevent the exotic palm trees from freezing to death between takes. The actors frequently recalled the sheer surrealism of stepping out of a freezing English morning and onto a meticulously heated, artificially humid set designed to look like a sweltering Vietnamese rainforest, proving that Kubrick would gladly bend nature itself to avoid boarding an airplane. Let's get on to fact number 10, the shaving ritual that drove the cast crazy. The psychological torment depicted during the basic training portion of the film was not entirely fictional. Kubrick went to extreme lengths to ensure the young actors felt the true, isolating weight of military erasure. In the United States Marine Corps, shaving a recruit's head is the ultimate tool for stripping away individuality and enforcing total conformity. Kubrick wanted that exact psychological environment to bleed into the daily lives of his cast. He mandated a strict production rule that every actor playing a Marine recruit had to completely shave their head down to the skin every single week, without exception. This rule was strictly enforced even during the long, agonizing stretches of weeks, where the actors were not scheduled to shoot a single scene. They had to maintain the jarring, skinhead look constantly, making it impossible for them to escape the reality of the movie during their personal downtime. This forced appearance completely alienated the young actors from London's vibrant 80s social scene, as local businesses and civilians frequently mistook them for dangerous political extremists or violent skinhead gangs. By cutting off their social outlets, Kubrick successfully trapped them in a persistent state of institutional isolation that perfectly mirrored the on-screen psychological breakdown. Tim Colkery's heartbreaking last-minute demotion. Behind the legendary casting of R. Lee Ermey lies the devastating professional heartbreak of Tim Colkery. The professional actor who originally won the coveted role of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. Colkery had spent months deeply researching the character, memorizing the massive script, and mentally preparing himself for a career-defining performance under a master director. He had already relocated his life to the English set when Kubrick suddenly delivered the crushing news that he was being completely replaced by Ermey, the technical advisor. To prevent a massive legal dispute and placate the devastated actor, Kubrick threw Colkery a minor consolation prize, the brief role of the unhinged door gunner in the helicopter scene. Colkery had to swallow his pride and channel his immense real-world rage and professional humiliation into that single sequence. When you watch that iconic scene today, where the helicopter gunner casually brags about slaughtering innocent Vietnamese women and children while laughing maniacally, the terrifying raw hostility vibrating in his voice is entirely genuine. Colkery was not just acting like a cold-blooded combat sociopath, he was actively channeling his profound fury toward Stanley Kubrick for destroying his shot at Hollywood stardom, creating a chillingly authentic cinematic moment out of pure personal spite. The secret audition tapes shipped in shoeboxes. The story of how Matthew Modine landed the lead role of Private Joker is a masterclass in rogue Hollywood maneuvering. After Anthony Michael Hall walked away from the production, Kubrick began a frantic global search for a new lead actor, prompting thousands of hopefuls to send in tapes. Modine desperately wanted the part, but instead of submitting a standard, polite Hollywood audition, he decided to use a bit of psychological manipulation on the eccentric director. Modine collaborated with a few filmmaker friends to shoot a highly stylized, gritty short film of himself wandering through the streets of New York, acting like a cynical, combat-hardened journalist. Instead of mailing it through official studio channels, he packed the tape into a beat-up, unlabeled cardboard shoebox and shipped it directly to Kubrick's private estate in England. When Kubrick opened the mysterious package and watched the footage, he was fascinated by the raw, unpolished, and completely unconventional nature of the submission. Modine had intentionally gambled on Kubrick's intense hatred for traditional studio-polished products, knowing the director preferred discovering raw talent in unexpected places. The risky shoebox gamble paid off completely, as Kubrick called Modine just days later to offer him the role that would define his entire acting career: the Belgian Army tanks that saved the set. Securing authentic military hardware for a Vietnam War movie filmed in the middle of England proved to be an administrative nightmare that nearly tanked the entire project. Kubrick initially reached out to the British Ministry of Defense, requesting the loan of period-accurate tanks, helicopters, and military weapons to bring authenticity to his fictional battlefields. However, the British government flatly refused to assist, citing deep political sensitivities surrounding the Vietnam War and a reluctance to support a film that portrayed military institutions in such a brutal, uncompromising light. Stranded without any firepower, Kubrick's logistics team had to get incredibly creative. They discovered that the Belgian army was currently decommissioning a massive fleet of period-accurate M41 Walker Bulldog tanks and old military vehicles. Bypassing the British government entirely, Kubrick used his immense wealth and studio leverage to rent the heavy armor directly from the Belgian military, shipping the massive tanks across the English Channel on commercial ferries. Furthermore, the production sourced hundreds of authentic, fully operational M16 rifles from private collectors and international arms dealers. This rogue military supply chain allowed Kubrick to bypass government censorship entirely, ensuring his vision of combat remained uncompromisingly realistic. The 18-month shoot that felt like an actual tour of duty. When the cast signed their contracts for the film, they expected a standard Hollywood shooting schedule of roughly 3 to 4 months. Instead, they were dragged into a grueling 18-month psychological marathon that hold the record as one of the longest continuous film shoots in cinema history. Kubrick's legendary perfectionism meant that a single, simple shot of soldiers walking down a street could take days to complete, with the director demanding upwards of 60 takes for minor background movements. As the weeks turned into months, the actors became completely disconnected from their normal lives, stuck in a perpetual loop of military simulation in the bleak British weather. The physical and mental exhaustion you see on the faces of the soldiers during the second half of the movie is not acting. It was the result of genuine, profound fatigue. Matthew Modine kept a detailed diary during the shoot, noting that the cast began to experience severe psychological disorientation, feeling less like actors on a movie set, and more like actual conscripted soldiers trapped in an endless, inescapable tour of duty. This grueling process was exactly what Kubrick intended, using real-world exhaustion to strip away Hollywood artifice. Vivian Kubrick's secret experimental electronic score. The deeply unsettling, cold, and industrial atmosphere of the movie is heavily driven by its unique musical score, which was composed under a veil of family secrecy. Instead of hiring a traditional, high-profile Hollywood orchestral composer, Kubrick handed the massive responsibility to his own 24-year-old daughter, Vivian Kubrick. To avoid accusations of blatant nepotism within the film industry, Vivian chose to hide behind the professional pseudonym Abigail Mead, a name derived from Abigail Barn, the historic home where the Kubrick family lived in England. Working in a private home studio, Vivian eschewed traditional instruments entirely, opting instead to use early, cutting-edge digital sampling synthesizers and industrial noise generators. She meticulously recorded the cold sounds of clanging metal distant explosions, and mechanical hums, manipulating the audio pitch to create an eerie, minimalist soundscape that perfectly mirrored the psychological degradation of the recruits. When paired with the stark, symmetrical visuals of the boot camp, her experimental electronic music created an intense feeling of mechanical dread. This hidden family collaboration resulted in one of the most innovative and deeply disturbing war movie scores ever created, perfectly capturing the cold reality of the military machine, the tragic sniper's hidden visual metaphor. The shocking climax of the Hue City sequence features the squad being systematically picked apart by a hidden, highly lethal sniper who is ultimately revealed to be a young Vietnamese girl. While this reveal serves as a brutal thematic punch to the gut regarding the innocence-destroying nature of war, Kubrick spent months subtly planting visual clues about her identity throughout the film's second half. If you closely examine the background geometry of the ruined buildings in the preceding scenes, Kubrick repeatedly frames the soldiers against stark, looming doorways shaped like traditional Asian burial shrouds. Furthermore, the sniper's eventual position inside a burning, bombed-out building is visually structured to mirror a traditional Buddhist altar. The young actress who played the sniper was forced to spend days hanging from a complex rig suspended over real fires to achieve the perfect, ghostly angling Kubrick demanded for her final moments. By transforming the hidden sniper into a living, breathing manifestation of the country's collective grief and rage, Kubrick elevated a standard combat sequence into a haunting, mythological confrontation. It remains one of the most visually complex and structurally analyzed sequences in modern cinematic history, proving that every frame held hidden meaning. Why the first and second halves feel like two different movies. One of the most frequent criticisms and praises aimed at the film is its jarring, almost violent structural split, dividing the narrative into two entirely distinct cinematic experiences. The first 45 minutes function as a hyper-focused, claustrophobic psychological thriller set inside a pristine, symmetrical boot camp, while the remaining runtime dissolves into a chaotic, sprawling, and messy urban combat film. This narrative whiplash was completely intentional on Kubrick's part, engineered to replicate the psychological shock experienced by actual military recruits. Kubrick explicitly designed the boot camp segments with bright, clean fluorescent lighting, sharp geometric lines, and a rigid, predictable rhythm to represent the absolute order of the military machine. In stark contrast, the Vietnam sequences utilize shaky, handheld camera movements, natural, muddy lighting, and an erratic, completely unpredictable pace where death can strike from any angle at any second. By forcing the audience to endure this extreme stylistic shift, Kubrick ensures that we feel the exact same sense of profound disorientation and loss of control that the young Marines experienced when they stepped off the transport bus and directly into the chaotic jaws of real combat. The deleted death scene that was just too brutal. Despite Stanley Kubrick's well-earned reputation for pushing the absolute boundaries of cinematic violence and psychological horror, there was one specific combat sequence that even he deemed too shocking for mainstream theater audiences. During the chaotic filming of the Battle of Hue, a highly graphic scene was shot, detailing the gruesome death of a minor squad member. In the original uncut footage, after the soldier is mortally wounded by enemy fire, his panicked, battle-crazed comrades completely lose their minds and begin interacting with a severed enemy head, treating it with a detached, feral amusement that resembled a twisted game of soccer. The sequence was intended to highlight the complete, terrifying psychological desensitization that occurs during prolonged, close-quarters urban warfare. However, when Kubrick reviewed the raw dailies in the quiet editing bay, he realized the moment crossed a fragile line from profound anti-war critique into gratuitous, unwatchable exploitation. Fearing the sequence would completely alienate the audience and cause censors to slap the movie with a restrictive rating, Kubrick ordered the negative permanently excised from the master cut. The footage remains locked away in the private Kubrick archives, a legendary piece of lost cinematic brutality. The real Marines who snuck onto the set. To populate the background of his fictional war zone with absolute authenticity, Stanley Kubrick bypassed traditional Hollywood casting agencies and instead recruited actual active-duty soldiers, British territorial troops, and Vietnam War veterans to serve as extras. Kubrick realized that standard background actors could never naturally replicate the specific, hardened physical posture, weapon-handling reflexes, and marching rhythms of genuine military personnel. These real-world soldiers were integrated directly into the chaotic Hue City combat scenes, operating heavy machinery, carrying wounded actors, and executing complex tactical maneuvers under real pressure. However, having actual military men on a notoriously chaotic, slow-moving movie set created an intense culture clash. The veterans frequently corrected the actors on their posture and language, while expressing frustration with Kubrick's demand for endless, repetitive takes of simple movements. This internal friction worked beautifully to the director's advantage. The background extras maintained a palpable, stone-faced seriousness that grounded the entire second half of the movie in a gritty, documentary-like realism. By surrounding his main cast with men who had actually stared into the face of real combat, Kubrick successfully stripped away any lingering Hollywood glamour, ensuring that every background movement felt entirely authentic, dangerous, and deeply rooted in the cold realities of actual historical warfare. With the background filled with real-world veterans and the air thick with authentic tension, the stage was set for a masterpiece. But nobody anticipated the physical scars the production would permanently leave on the very landscape of England itself. How did a fictional movie about a distant Asian conflict end up triggering a decades-long environmental crisis in a quiet corner of London? We'll answer that in the 20th and final fact. The toxic legacy left behind in the soil of London. The production of Full Metal Jacket didn't just push the actors to their absolute psychological limits. It inflicted severe, long-lasting damage on the actual environment of East London. To transform the abandoned Beckton gasworks into a convincing replica of the war-torn city of Hue, Kubrick's special effects teams utilized hundreds of tons of real explosives, diesel-fueled firebombs, and simulated chemical smoke to create a constant atmosphere of combat destruction. What production assistants didn't fully account for at the time was that the old industrial gasworks site was already heavily contaminated with decades of buried industrial waste, including toxic coal tars, heavy metals, and massive quantities of undisturbed structural asbestos. The constant, high-powered explosions systematically vaporized these hidden toxic materials, blasting them directly into the air and settling them deep into the surrounding soil. Long after the Hollywood cameras packed up and left England, local environmental agencies discovered that the filming site had become an ecological hazard zone, requiring a multi-million-dollar, decades-long decontamination effort to safely clear the poisoned earth for future corporate and residential development. It remains a stark, highly bizarre testament to Kubrick's uncompromising creative vision, proving that his relentless pursuit of cinematic realism literally left a permanent, highly toxic scar on the face of the earth. From secret audio tapes hidden in cardboard shoeboxes to a literal environmental crisis left rotting in British soil, the chaotic journey behind Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece proves that the real-world battle to create this iconic film was just as intense, unpredictable, and completely unhinged as the legendary war depicted on the silver screen. The grueling 18-month campaign to bring Full Metal Jacket to life proves that Stanley Kubrick didn't just direct a movie. He waged a psychological war on his cast, crew, and the very landscape of England. From Ermey's unscripted verbal warfare to toxic industrial battlegrounds faked in the British cold, the true story behind this cinematic masterpiece is a chaotic testament to the extremes of creative obsession. It remains a flawless, unsettling exploration of the military machine that changed the face of cinema forever. If you want more deep dives into movie history, hit that subscribe button right now.